My brother sold my life to something that doesn't have a name, just to settle a childhood grudge. I know exactly how insane that sounds. But when you spend 30 years patrolling the boundary lines of the deep reservation, you learn a terrible truth. You learn that the most dangerous things in the wilderness aren't the predators with claws and teeth. The most dangerous things are the quiet, rotting resentments buried inside the people you trust the most. My name is Arthur. For 3 decades, I have been a boundary tracker for the tribal police in a very remote, unforgiving stretch of the Southwest. My job is simple on paper. I ride the fence line between the paved roads of modern civilization and the deep, unmapped canyons that the elders sealed off over 70 years ago. I look for lost hikers, illegal poachers, and broken fences, but my real job, the one they don't write down in the official manuals, is to make sure that whatever lives in those dark valleys stays in those dark valleys. I didn't work this job alone. For the last 10 years, my patrol partner was my younger brother, Elias. Elias was 10 years younger than me. And we grew up under the heavy hand of a father who was a legend in these parts. Our father was a master tracker, a man made of rawhide and old irons. And he never let Elias forget that he wasn't as good as his older brother. Whenever we hunted, whenever we tracked, my father would praise my patience and punish Elias for his mistakes. He pitted us against each other, carving a deep, silent canyon of jealousy into my brother's heart. I tried to protect Elias. I tried to build him up. But pity turns into poison if you let it sit in a man's soul long enough. Elias wanted money. He wanted respect. He wanted, more than anything, to step out of my shadow and prove he was the better man. I just never realized how much he was willing to sacrifice to get there. The nightmare began in late October. The air had turned bitterly cold, the kind of dry, biting chill that strips the leaves from the cottonwoods and makes the earth hard as bone. Elias had told me he was taking a side job off the books, guiding a group of wealthy wildlife photographers along the safe outer trails. It was against protocol, but we needed the money, and I looked the other way. He was supposed to be gone for 2 days. He was gone for 5, when he finally came walking up the long dirt driveway to our boundary cabin. The sun was just starting to dip below the tree line, casting long, unnatural shadows across the yard. I stepped out onto the porch, relief washing over me, but that relief died the second I really looked at him. Elias didn't have his truck. He didn't have his rifle. He didn't have his heavy pack. He was just walking, his arms hanging limp at his sides, his head down. I ran out to meet him. His face was a pale, sickly gray, and he was trembling so violently his teeth were clicking together. I asked him where he had been, where his truck was, and what had happened to the photographers. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He stared at my boots and muttered a clumsy lie. He said his truck had broken down near the Badlands, that the clients had gotten frustrated and hiked back to the highway on their own, and that he had spent the last 3 days walking home in a daze. But I am a tracker. My entire life is built on observing the details that other people miss. And everything about my brother was a screaming contradiction. His clothes were torn and covered in dried mud, but his boots were completely clean, as if he had carefully washed them in a creek. He smelled wrong too. He didn't smell like pine sap and wood smoke. He smelled like copper, ozone, and old, stagnant earth. But the most glaring detail was on his left wrist. Poking out from the frayed sleeve of his jacket was a heavy, solid gold watch. It was the kind of watch that cost more than our cabin. Elias caught me looking at it, quickly shoved his hands into his pockets, and pushed past me into the house without another word. That night, the tension in the cabin was suffocating. I sat in the living room, listening to the wind howl against the window panes. While Elias locked himself in his bedroom, I knew he was hiding something. I suspected he had robbed his clients, or worse, that a hunt had gone wrong and he was covering up an accident. But then around 2 in the morning, I heard his door creak open. I stayed perfectly still in my chair, listening. I heard him walk softly to the front of the house. I heard the faint, dry rustle of something powdery being sprinkled on the floorboards. Then I heard him retreat to his room and lock his door. When I was sure he was asleep, I got up and turned on my flashlight. What I saw made my blood run cold. Elias had taken a pouch of white cedar ash from our father's old medicine box. In our culture, cedar ash is used to line the windowsills and doorways to keep dark things from crossing the threshold. It is a barrier against the ancient walkers of the night. But Elias hadn't lined the perimeter of the cabin. He had only poured a thick, unbroken line of ash across his own bedroom door. He had sealed himself in. I walked to the front door. The heavy iron deadbolt, the one we lock every single night without fail, was flipped open. The door was unlocked. Elias had intentionally left the house vulnerable. He had protected himself and left me exposed to whatever was out there in the dark. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat by the fireplace with my rifle across my lap, staring at the unlocked door, waiting for the sun. The moment the sky turned a bruised, pale purple, I left the cabin. I didn't wake Elias. I walked out to the edge of the driveway, found his fresh footprints from the evening before, and I began to track my own brother backwards into the wilderness. The trail was easy to read at first. Elias had been walking with a heavy, exhausted stride, his heels digging deep into the frosted dirt. I followed his path for 6 miles, moving fast, my anxiety growing with every step. The trail led me completely off the patrol routes, past the warning signs and deep into the restricted zone. He was heading directly toward Red Ash Canyon, a place the tribal elders had declared forbidden before I was even born. It was a dead valley, a place where the trees grew twisted and the wildlife refused to go. By noon, I found the hidden camp. Tucked beneath a massive overhang of red rock was my brother's truck, covered in brush to hide it from the air. Next to it were 3 large, expensive canvas tents. The camp was completely destroyed. But it wasn't a bear or a mountain lion that had done this. The tents had been slashed open from the inside out. High-end hunting gear, rifles, and expensive coolers were scattered everywhere, abandoned in pure panic. I searched the wreckage and found a leather-bound journal belonging to one of the men. It took only a few pages to realize the terrifying truth. These men weren't photographers, they were black market trophy hunters. And Elias hadn't taken them on a safe trail, according to the journal. Elias had accepted $50,000 to guide them into the Forbidden Canyon to hunt a legendary, massive elk that the locals whispered about. Elias had sold out our sacred lands, broken his oath as a ranger, and risked all their lives just to prove he could make big money. Just to prove he was a big man, but there was no blood at the camp, no bodies. Just the frantic, chaotic footprints of 3 men sprinting deeper into the canyon. And my brother's footprints chasing after them. I followed the tracks. A mile past the camp, the story in the dirt changed into a nightmare. The 3 hunters' footprints suddenly stopped. Right in the middle of a clearing, their tracks just vanished. But lying on the ground were their clothes, their heavy winter coats, their boots, their pants. They were completely intact. The zippers were still zipped, the laces were still tied. It was as if the men inside them had simply evaporated, leaving their empty shells behind. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I looked away from the clothes and found my brother's tracks. Elias had stopped at the edge of the clearing. The dirt showed that he had fallen to his knees. And standing directly in front of him were another set of tracks. They were bare footprints, but they were monstrously wrong. They were far too long, the toes digging into the soil like heavy claws. The stride impossibly wide for a human. I knew instantly what I was looking at. It was a Skinwalker. A naaldlooshii, one of the ancient, twisted shapeshifters that roamed the black zones of the reservation, feeding on the greed and fear of those who broke the old rules. The hunters had likely fired upon it, thinking it was an animal and it had taken them, but it hadn't taken Elias. I knelt down in the dirt, examining the space between my brother's knee prints and the creature's massive, clawed feet. There was no sign of a struggle. The creature had stood there, towering over him. And then I saw it. Half buried in the frost was a small, silver object. I reached out with a trembling hand and picked it up. It was my hunting knife, the custom silver knife my father had given me on my 18th birthday. The knife I kept in a locked drawer by my bed. I realized in a sickening flash that Elias had stolen it weeks ago. In the darkest lore of our people, there is a terrible rule. If you are caught by a walker of the night, you cannot outrun it, you cannot fight it. The only way to survive is to make a bargain. You have to offer it a blood tie. You have to give it something belonging to someone you share blood with. And you have to speak their name. You invite the creature to take them instead. Elias hadn't just escaped. He had traded my life for his own. He had knelt in the dirt, terrified and pathetic, and handed the monster my knife. He gave it my scent, he gave it my name. I looked at the tracks walking away from the scene. The massive clawed footprints of the creature suddenly shifted. They changed shape. shrinking and molding into the dirt until they perfectly matched the tread of my own boots. The creature had taken my identity. It was coming for me, and my brother had gone home, locked his door, and left the front door wide open to welcome it in. A surge of absolute blinding rage hit me. I didn't care about the cold. I didn't care about the distance. I turned and ran back toward the boundary line. I ran for hours, my lungs burning, the muscles in my legs screaming in agony. The sun began to drop behind the mountains, painting the sky in violent streaks of red and bruised purple. The shadows in the forest grew long and reaching. The woods, which usually echoed with the sounds of birds and rustling wind, went completely, terrifyingly silent. The kind of silence that means a predator is walking through the trees. I burst through the tree line just as the last sliver of daylight vanished. I sprinted up the driveway, threw open the front door of the cabin, and slammed the deadbolt shut. I locked every heavy latch we had. Elias burst out of his bedroom, his eyes wide with panic. He had a duffel bag packed over his shoulder. He was trying to run away before nightfall, leaving me to face the consequence of his cowardice. When he saw the look on my face, he froze. He saw my chest heaving. He saw the silver knife clutched in my bloody, freezing hand. "I know what you did," I whispered, my voice ragged and raw. Elias dropped his bag. His face crumbled and he backed away from me, his hands raised in surrender. "Arthur, please," he begged, tears spilling down his face. "You don't understand, it had them. It took them right in front of me. It was going to take me next. It looked at me, Arthur. It looked right into my head." "So you gave it my knife," I said, stepping toward him. "You gave it my name. You sold your own blood to save your skin." "I had to," Elias screamed, his voice cracking with years of buried resentment. "You've always been the golden child. You've always been the survivor. Dad always said you were the strong one. I thought you could beat it. I thought you would know what to do." "You didn't think I could beat it," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. "You hated me. You've always hated me for being what you couldn't be. And you finally found a way to let the dark do your dirty work." Elias sobbed, sliding down the wall to the floor, hiding his face in his hands. But before he could speak another word, the cabin shuddered. A heavy, deliberate footstep landed on the wooden planks of the front porch. Elias choked on his breath, his eyes wide with absolute terror. I raised my rifle, aiming it directly at the thick oak wood of the front door. The woods outside were dead silent. There was only the sound of a second footstep, then a third. It was pacing back and forth across the porch, the floorboards groaning under an impossible weight. Then it spoke. "Arthur," the voice called out from the darkness. My heart stopped. It wasn't a monstrous growl, it wasn't a demonic hiss, it was my own voice. It sounded exactly like me, perfectly mimicking the rough, tired cadence of my speech. "Arthur, open the door," my voice pleaded from the other side of the wood. "It's freezing out here. My truck broke down, I got lost in the Badlands. Please, brother, let me in." Elias covered his ears, pressing himself flat against the floorboards, rocking back and forth. The creature was mocking us. It was playing back the lie Elias had told me the day before, but in my voice. It knew everything. "Don't listen to it," I told Elias. My hands gripping the rifle so tight my knuckles turned white. The pacing on the porch stopped. There was a long, agonizing stretch of silence, and then a new voice spoke. "Elias." Elias stopped rocking. The blood drained from his face entirely. It was our father's voice. It was deep, harsh, and dripping with the exact same disappointment that had haunted Elias his entire life. "You were always so weak, Elias," our father's voice sneered through the door. "Always crying, always failing. I knew you would betray your own blood. You are a coward, you are nothing. Open the door and take your punishment like a man." "No," Elias whimpered, tears streaming down his face. "No, he's dead, he's dead." "I am not dead, boy," the voice boomed, rattling the windows in their frames. "I am waiting for you. You made a deal. You signed a contract in the dirt, but you made one mistake, Elias. A coward's bargain means nothing to the earth. It doesn't just want Arthur anymore. It wants the weak link, it wants you." Suddenly, a massive, unnatural force slammed against the front door. The thick oak bowed inward, the iron deadbolt groaning under the pressure. The creature wasn't going to wait to be invited in. The rules had shifted. Because Elias had acted out of malice and jealousy, the blood tie was corrupted. The creature didn't just want my life. It wanted to consume the rot inside my brother. The door violently slammed again. The wood began to splinter. The hinges shrieked, pulling away from the frame. I looked at Elias. He was staring at the door, completely broken, the jealousy, the greed. The desperate need to prove himself, it had all burned away, leaving nothing but the terrified little boy he had always been. But in that moment of absolute despair, I saw something shift in his eyes. He looked at the silver knife in my hand. Then he looked at the splintering door. He realized that I couldn't shoot it. Bullets don't kill ancient things. The only way to stop a blood bargain is to break the tie. The one who offered the sacrifice must take it back. Arthur, Elias whispered. His voice was suddenly incredibly calm. It was the calm of a man who realizes he has reached the end of his road. And there is nowhere left to run. He stood up. He walked over to me, reaching out his hand. "Give me the knife," he said. "Elias, no," I said, my voice trembling. Despite everything he had done, despite the betrayal and the hatred, he was still my brother. I remembered him as a child, trying so hard to keep up with me on the trails. I remembered the heavy weight of my father's hand on his shoulder. "I brought this here," Elias said, his eyes locking onto mine with a clarity I had never seen in him before. "I let him turn me into this. I let the jealousy eat me alive. If I don't stop it, it's going to kill you. And it's going to wear your face forever." Before I could stop him, Elias reached out and ripped the silver knife from my grip. The front door slammed a third time, the top hinge completely snapping off. The door hung awkwardly, a sliver of pitch-black darkness revealing itself in the gap. Elias didn't hesitate. He didn't look back at me. He walked directly to the door, grabbed the heavy iron handle, and threw it wide open. The cold wind screamed into the cabin, blowing out the lanterns and plunging the room into darkness. In the doorway stood a towering, shifting silhouette. It was impossibly tall, wearing the tattered, shredded clothes of one of the hunters, but its face was a swirling, horrifying mass of pale skin and glowing, pale yellow eyes. "I take it back," Elias screamed into the darkness, holding the silver knife up high. "I take back the name. I take back the blood. You belong to me." The creature let out a sound that I will never be able to describe. It was the sound of 100 men screaming in agony, mixed with the guttural roar of a dying animal. It lunged forward, wrapping its massive, elongated limbs around my brother. "Lock the door, Arthur," Elias roared, his voice cutting through the wind. "Lock the door and don't open it." The creature dragged Elias backward, pulling him off the porch and into the pitch-black void of the yard. I scrambled forward in the dark, my hands bleeding from the splinters, and shoved the heavy oak door back into its frame. I slammed the deadbolt shut and collapsed against the wood, shaking uncontrollably. Outside, the screaming lasted for a long time. It echoed through the trees, bouncing off the canyon walls, fading deeper and deeper into the restricted zone, until it was finally swallowed by the silence of the wilderness. I stayed on the floor until the morning sun crept through the windows, casting a pale, cold light across the room. When I finally found the strength to open the door, the yard was empty. There was no blood on the porch, there were no footprints in the frost. It was as if my brother and the creature had never existed. The only thing left behind was lying in the dirt at the edge of the tree line. It was the heavy, solid gold watch Elias had brought back with him. It was perfectly clean, shining in the morning sun. A quiet monument to the greed that had destroyed my family. I still patrol the boundary lines today. I ride the fences alone now. The tribal police classified Elias as missing in action. Swallowed up by a sudden canyon flash flood, they gave him a plaque. I let them believe the lie because the truth is something the modern world isn't equipped to handle. But I know the truth. I know that somewhere deep in Red Ash Canyon, in the dark places where the trees grow twisted and the shadows never move, something is walking through the woods. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right across the canyon, I can hear it calling out in the dark. It doesn't use my father's voice anymore, it uses my brother's voice. It wanders the tree line crying out for help, begging for someone to come into the dark and save him. But I know the rules of the deep woods. And I know the hardest lesson a boundary tracker will ever learn. The woods are calling, but you shouldn't answer.